Hello, new friends and family. Welcome to the Scare Hub, where I'll tell you some of the most interesting, scary, or weird happenings that has graced our planet. Today, we will be talking about the world's most heavily documented alien abduction, and it's the story that started it all. What happened to this unfortunate couple would shape how people view aliens in the modern day. But before we get to that, I would like to ask you to get comfortable in your bed and set the volume just right so you can get the best experience. And make sure you treat the subscribe button real nice. That way, my channel can grow and I can bring you more interesting and downright scary content. Okay, if you're ready, comfortable, and intrigued, then let's get weird. On December 14, 1963, at approximately 8 a.m., a man and his wife walked into a psychiatrist's office, desperately looking for help. The doctor, a medical professional named Benjamin Simon, figured this couple had another normal case of anxiety brought on by marital problems or society as a whole. The doctor could be forgiven for making this assumption when he first laid eyes on the husband and wife, seeing as though they were an interracial twosome living in the oppressive 1960s. But after months of deep discussions and a few horrifying sessions of hypnosis, what Dr. Simon found out about what really happened to these individuals was far from the status quo. In fact, the story of that pair, Betty and Barney Hill, will go on to change how scientists, civilians, pop culture, and historians alike fantasize, imagine, and depicted alien beings from then on. The horrifying but captivating tale of these two lovers starts 2 years before their visit with Dr. Simon, on a long stretch of road called Highway 3, located in the White Mountains of New Hampshire. Betty and Barney were just returning home from a long overdue vacation in Niagara Falls that was needed due to their numerous activities. Barney Hill made his living as a postal worker, where he would have to drive 60 miles just to make it to the office before grabbing his mail, going on his route in the neighborhood, and driving 60 miles back home. Betty Hill's job wasn't any easier, as she was a government agent who managed child abuse and mistreatment cases. Add to that they were both active members in the NAACP and most likely had to deal with racial bigotry on a daily basis, and to say that their lives were a little hectic is an understatement. So imagine their delight when Barney comes in and tells his loving wife that they are both going away for the weekend to spend some time in Niagara Falls to get away from it all. However, the bliss and rejuvenation they received from that weekend was wiped away as they were driving down Highway 3, and Betty recalled seeing bright flashing lights in the sky. To set the stage, the two newlyweds had just left the diner at around 10 p.m. and were quickly speeding away from said eatery. They were surrounded by mountains and trees, which was enough cover for the seemingly moving ball of light in the sky to pop in and out of Mrs. Hill's vision as Mr. Hill drove towards their Portsmouth, New Hampshire home. After his wife brought it to his attention, Barney, not wanting to worry her, assured her that it's just a satellite that got lost. Now, before you go on thinking Barney did not care about his wife's discomfort, you must understand that he is a World War II veteran and indulged in a plane watching hobby. On top of that, he was one of the most pragmatic men you could ever meet, which served him well during those tumultuous times for a black man. Even though the idea of aliens were around during that time, it wasn't as mainstream as it is today. Therefore, it wasn't an explanation that Barney Hill was ready to explore in earnest. But when the floating ball of light started to make maneuvers around the car that seemed almost impossible, curiosity got the better of the driver, and they pulled over to the side of the road to get a better look. Betty raised Barney's trusty plane watcher binoculars to her eyes and observed the levitating light, which she now recognized as a pancake-shaped craft spinning in midair. With this new revelation, Barney's lost satellite theory went straight out the window. He had no choice but to agree with his wife, because although he did not want to consider anything supernatural for the floating object, he was at a loss for more reasonable answers. Now knowing that the object in the sky was a craft and not a ball of light, they set back on their way towards home, but with a more cautious attitude. It wasn't too long before getting back on the road that the craft was now only 100 feet away from their vehicle, hovering right near them. This is when a bit of concern started to creep into Barney's otherwise practical mind, and he stopped the car, grabbed a pistol he kept under his seat, told his wife to stay put, and charged into a nearby field in the dead of night. When the patriarch finally got close enough to the UFO to get a good look, he couldn't believe what he was seeing. He looked otherworldly and challenged all of his beliefs as to what life truly was. He was then met with a row of about 10 humanoid figures, wearing all black uniforms and hats. Suddenly, one of the beings spoke to Mr. Hill. They told him to stay calm and stay put, using telepathy. The gun-wielding Mr. Hill was thoroughly freaked out at this point. Deciding that he wasn't going to do anything meaningful with that pistol, he tucked it into his pants and he made a break back towards his car, yelling at his wife to start the engine, with hopes of getting back in the driver's seat and making a quick getaway from this menacing flying pancake. But the navigators of that craft was not going to let that happen, as they quickly sent shockwaves towards their car that made the trunk of the vehicle produce a rhythmic beat. After that, the interracial couple fell into a deep sleep, and the aliens took them aboard. Betty and Barney Hill awoke 2 hours later in their car, with their clothes slightly tattered. They were about 30 miles closer to home, but they did not know how they got there, nor what happened to them. All they knew was they had a newfound feeling of anxiety, which gave Mrs. Hill terrifying nightmares. This brings us back to the couple sitting in front of Dr. Benjamin Simon, asking him for help at their horrifying ordeal. With the use of hypnosis, they were able to recount the odd and invasive things the gray bulbous-eyed beings did to them while they were on their vessel. The couple recalls being stripped of their clothing before the beings took hair samples, nail clippings, and skin scraps. They even performed a strange test on Mrs. Hill by jabbing a long 5-inch needle in her stomach, causing her to roll in pain. What's even stranger than that is that Betty Hill was able to have a full-blown conversation with the leader of the craft. She asked them where they were, as the aliens had took them to outer space to conduct their experiment. The leader did not want to disclose their location, citing that Mrs. Hill's relatively lower intelligence compared to the alien beings would not allow her to understand a real truthful answer. Although, she was able to draw a diagram of the star pattern she saw while looking outside the ship. In the aftermath of what was later dubbed the Betty and Barney Hill incident, there were numerous changes that happened to the alien abduction zeitgeist. Pop culture started to view aliens very differently, from how they looked to where people were more likely to get abducted from. As for the victims of this abduction, they went back to their normal lives soon after, not seeking any publicity for their harrowing experience. It wasn't until their account of what happened went public around 1965 that their lives started to take a turn for the worst. Many people threw all sorts of doubt onto their story, saying they were misremembering or straight up lying about what happened to them. Unfortunately, Barney Hill died at the age of 46 due to a brain hemorrhage. Meanwhile, Mrs. Hill lived to the ripe old age of 84 before succumbing to cancer. However, she did become an icon to many UFO enthusiasts, who were all very interested in her story. They are survived by many children and grandchildren, one of which is a UFC superstar named Angela Hill. And Betty and Barney Hill will forever be remembered as the first ever documented alien abduction. Well, Scare Hub fans, that was the story of a rather unfortunate interracial couple going down the wrong road at the wrong time. Please let me know in the comments whether you believe it or not. Personally, I find it hard to believe that someone can fake trauma as deeply cutting as what Betty and Barney Hill experienced. I can only imagine that Barney Hill's brain hemorrhage was led on by what happened to him in the following media frenzy. But enough of my opinion. Please let me know what you think in the comments below. And that's going to be it for me. Come back later for more horrifying but interesting stories. And please don't leave me alone to take care of the subscribe button by myself. In fact, before you leave, please give it a nice pat on the head and tell them to have a nice day. I bid you adieu.